Get out of my park, old man. I'm only feeding the ducks, son. Don't call me son. Preston Caldwell grabbed Everett Hayes by the collar and jerked him halfway off the bench. Who do you think you are? Acting like you're my father, you limping old fool. Please let go of my shirt. Preston kicked the wooden cane out from beneath Everett's arm. Everett's injured knee folded, and he struck the concrete hard. Preston let him fall, then turned toward the four young men standing behind him. You're making my park stink, old man. Maybe I should ruin your other knee so you can crawl home. Please don't say that. Teach him a lesson, Preston. This old man really thinks he can talk back to me. The group tightened around the bench. Everett slowly pushed himself upright, while every joint in his body protested. Then he looked directly at Preston. Are you sure about that, son? Preston had no idea who he had just attacked. Have you ever seen the expression on a bully's face when he finally realizes he chose the wrong person? Stay with me, because this story began long before that moment beside the duck pond. Everett's mornings had followed the same quiet pattern for years. He laced his shoes in the modest apartment above a corner deli on County Road 33. The place carried the familiar smell of old wood, coffee grounds, and the faint trace of the woman who had once filled every room with laughter. Coffee came first. Then came the framed photograph on the refrigerator. Marlene stood on a beach during one of their anniversary trips, laughing at something Everett could no longer remember. He touched a finger to his lips, then pressed it gently against the glass. It was always the same order, the same silence, and the same fresh cup of coffee growing cold while he stared. They had shared 40 years of marriage. He had spent the last 3 without her. His knee was especially painful that morning. He rubbed liniment into it, wrapped it in an elastic sleeve, and lifted the wooden cane from the hook beside the door. The cane had belonged to his father. It had traveled with Everett through more difficult places than anyone in Briar Glen could have imagined. Briar Glen, Ohio, was a small town with 2 churches, 1 high school, and 1 grocery store that had once belonged to a national chain. The public park rested at the end of Maple Street, where the river curved beneath the water tower. Everett lived only a few blocks away, and he knew every crack in the sidewalk between his front door and his favorite bench. Mrs. Whitmore usually waved from her porch. She had sung in the church choir with Marlene for decades. Raphael, who owned the bicycle shop, nodded as he unlocked his doors. Marjorie at the corner cup kept Everett's black coffee ready whenever he passed. No charge, she would say. She had refused his money ever since Marlene's funeral. Feeding the little ones again, Everett? Every day. Give them a piece for me. The bench stood between 2 oak trees, only a few steps from the duck pond. Marlene had chosen it during their first spring in town. From there, they could see the water, and the morning sun always found them through the leaves. Everett broke stale sourdough into a paper bag resting on his lap. The ducks knew him. The geese knew him. Even the gray heron that hunted in the shallows seemed to recognize the soft click of his cane. What Preston Caldwell could not see when he stood over Everett with contempt in his eyes was any of that. He could not see Marlene's photograph on the refrigerator. He could not see the old championship belt buried beneath folded clothes in a cardboard box. He could not see the years Everett had spent competing for regional promoters throughout the Midwest. There had been crowded gymnasiums, smoky veterans halls, televised undercards, and 1 nationally broadcast main event. Marlene had watched that match from the front row in a green dress. Preston could not see the mornings when Everett returned home with a face that frightened her, or the quiet effort it took to make her laugh again before breakfast. Preston saw none of it because Preston was not truly looking. Howe was 28, unemployed, and living in his father's house after failing to make the family's restaurant business succeed in the city. The last family dinner had ended with his father, Harlan Caldwell, calling him weak, unfocused, and an embarrassment to the family name. Preston's older brother had nodded through the entire speech. His mother had remained silent. Preston needed to feel powerful. He needed to prove that he was a Caldwell. 4 friends followed him because each of them was carrying his own version of the same emptiness. Blake's father owned the local auto shop. Colby had inherited nothing but his father's temper. Wesley attended community college with money saved by his mother. Grant had no plan at all. They gathered in Briar Glen Park because it cost nothing, and none of them had anywhere more meaningful to be. For nearly 2 weeks, they watched Everett feed the ducks. Preston convinced himself that choosing the old man was strategy, but it was really hunger. Everett was elderly. Everett lived alone. Everett walked with a cane. He sat quietly and never looked up when Preston's group drifted past the bench. In Preston's calculations, Everett was easy. How was wrong? The sound of that cane striking the concrete would eventually become the loudest sound the town had heard in years. Before long, everyone in Briar Glen would understand why. Their first conversation had taken place days earlier. Everett sat on the bench with a paper bag in his lap, and the cane resting against his good knee. The herons stood near the shallows while mallards fought over crusts of bread. Preston and his friends came up the gravel path in a loose cluster, laughing too loudly and keeping their hands buried in their pockets. Preston stopped several feet from the bench. "Look at this. A nature show. Old man against wet birds." The others laughed. Colby spat into the grass. Everett did not look up. He simply tore off another piece of sourdough. "Hey, I'm talking to you. I heard you. Do you always feed these rats from this bench? We've been coming here for days, and you're always sitting in the same place with the same birds." Everett broke another crust. "It's my bench." "Your bench?" Preston walked in a slow circle around him, his boots grinding against the gravel. "This whole park was built with Caldwell money. The east side of Briar Glen belonged to my family before you ever came here. You know that?" "I know what your family claims." "Then get off Caldwell property." Everett finally raised his eyes. They were quiet in the way still water is quiet before a stone breaks the surface. He looked at Preston without anger and without fear. That calm expression unsettled Preston more than an insult would have. "I'm not property," Everett said. "Neither is this bench." Blake shifted uncomfortably. Wesley looked down at his phone. Only Colby kept smiling. Preston felt the moment slipping away. Whenever that happened, he reached for cruelty. He kicked the paper bag from Everett's lap. Bread scattered across the gravel, and the ducks fled toward the water. "See you again, old man. Bring more bread. My rats need to eat." The group walked away, laughing. Everett remained on the bench. He picked up one piece of bread, brushed away the dirt, and finished feeding the ducks brave enough to return. That evening, in the small kitchen above the deli, Everett opened a drawer he had not touched in many years. He removed a small black notebook. On the first clean page, he wrote Preston Caldwell, first contact. The following morning, Preston came alone. He sat on Everett's bench before Everett arrived, stretching his legs across the path and resting both arms along the backrest. "Morning, old man." The bench looked empty. Everett nodded once, walked farther down the path, and sat on another bench. Preston laughed. "So you can move. I thought you were attached to that one." Everett opened his paper bag. The ducks came to him. They did not care which bench he used. On another day, Preston brought Colby. They stood behind Everett and dropped cigarette butts into the coffee cup beside him. Later, Preston chased the ducks away with his boots. Everett waited for them to return. Preston kept going until they would not. Then, after 2 quiet days, Everett reached the pond and found a dead duck on the bench. Its neck had been broken. He stood there for a long time, saying nothing. Finally, he placed the bird inside the paper bag, carried it home, and buried it behind the deli in an old coffee can. He offered a short prayer. Everett no longer attended church, but Marlene had believed deeply, and some habits stayed in the heart long after everything else changed. That evening, Everett made a telephone call he had not made in decades. "Vernon? Everett Hayes. Is that really you?" "It's me. I haven't heard your voice since that trouble in Kentucky. Are you all right? I've got a situation." Vernon Brooks was a few years older than Everett and operated a small gym above a laundromat in Cleveland. He listened without interrupting. When Everett finished, Vernon asked one question. "How many?" "Usually 5. One does most of the talking." "Is he carrying a weapon?" "Not that I've seen." "You still have a notebook?" "I started a new one." "Good. Write down every incident, every witness, and every phone that records them. And don't touch a hair on that boy's head unless he touches you first. Do you hear me, Everett?" "I hear you." "Because people will twist this. An older black man, a group of young white men, and a small town. They'll twist it quickly, and they'll twist it hard." "I know. I'll come down soon. Bring your camera." "I'll bring the good one." Everett ended the call and wrote in the notebook, "Called Vernon. He's coming." At the same time, Preston stood inside his father's study and stared at a framed photograph of his grandfather. The picture showed the first Caldwell grill shortly after it opened. Harlan Caldwell was in the photograph as a boy, wearing a bow tie beside his father. At the most recent family dinner, Harlan had announced that the Briar Glen restaurant would close unless its numbers improved. He had spoken while looking at Preston's brother, not Preston. Preston decided he would change that. He would make the Caldwell name important again. His father's redevelopment plan for the east side had been stalled by 3 properties. 2 were aging apartments above empty stores. The third was a modest apartment above the deli on County Road 33, owned outright by a widower who had rejected several cash offers. That widower had a name, Everett Hayes, retired, 68 years old, no children, no attorney, no mortgage, no visible income beyond retirement benefits, no close family nearby, no position on any town board. Easy, Preston thought. He stared at his grandfather's photograph and made himself a promise. He would break Everett's spirit, or he would break Everett himself. Either way, the apartment, the deli, and the other parcels would eventually become available. Then his father would finally look across the dinner table and see him. Preston told none of this to Blake. Blake might have understood too much. Soon afterward, Preston noticed Everett writing in the black notebook after another confrontation. "What's that? Are you keeping a diary about me?" "Notes for a police report." Preston laughed louder than necessary, and his friends followed his lead. That night, however, he began to worry. Written notes were dangerous, but he believed they were not enough. He wanted something on camera, something that could make Everett look guilty before the old man had a chance to explain. He needed Everett to strike first. Preston built a plan over several days. He chose an afternoon when joggers usually passed the pond. He assigned 3 phones to 3 different positions. One friend would throw a cup of coffee. Another would fall. Grant would take the fall because Preston believed Grant had the least to lose. Wesley would shout for help. By the time an ambulance arrived, the internet would already have chosen its side. Meanwhile, Everett drove to Cleveland and spent most of a day at Vernon's gym. They did not spar. They talked, studied the floor, and reviewed every possible outcome. Old photographs covered the walls. Everett appeared in several of them, heavier and younger, wearing red trunks with one gloved hand raised. Vernon showed him a body camera hidden inside a coat button. He showed him an audio recorder shaped like a pen. He explained how the camera could stream directly to a secure folder. Then he walked Everett through 3 drills: how to protect the recorder, how to keep the audio clear, how to fall in a controlled way without making the movement look rehearsed, how to say, "I am asking you to leave," in a voice strong enough to carry across a courtroom. "You're not fighting them," Vernon said. "You're recording them. If they cross the line, you protect yourself. Not 1 inch more. Not 1 inch more. Say it again. Not 1 inch more. Because if you cross that line, Everett, they'll bury you, and I'm too old to dig you out again." Everett returned home with the camera in his coat pocket and the recording pen clipped inside his notebook. The confrontation that would spread across the internet was approaching. Preston believed he was ready. Everett knew the difference between being prepared and merely believing you were. On the morning of the confrontation, Everett stayed at his kitchen table longer than usual. He opened the small body camera and clipped it behind the second button of his coat, angled upward and outward. He secured the audio pen inside the notebook cover. He tested both devices on his phone, then tested them again. Vernon arrived after driving down from Cleveland. He carried a duffel bag containing a second phone, a folding tripod, and an old coffee thermos Everett had forgotten at the gym many years earlier. "You ready?" "I am." "Do you remember what we agreed?" "Not 1 inch more." "Say it again." "Not 1 inch more." Vernon positioned the second phone inside the deli window, aimed across the street toward the park. If every phone near the pond failed, this one would still capture what happened. Then he handed Everett a business card folded in half. "A civil rights attorney I know in Columbus. Her name is Simone Carter. She's expecting your call before the day ends, no matter how this goes." "Thank you." "Don't thank me. Come home safely." Everett finished his coffee and looked at Marlene's photograph. He kissed his finger and touched the glass. Then he rinsed the cup the way she had taught him. Hot water first, cold water afterward. He dried it with the checkered towel and placed it upside down on the rack. He put on his coat. He checked the camera twice. He checked the audio pen again. Then he lifted his father's cane, the one that had crossed state lines and accompanied him through years of ring walks. Vernon watched from the deli window as Everett stepped outside. Neither man waved. They had stood in each other's corners before. Both knew what a walk toward danger looked like. Everett made his way to the park during his usual afternoon routine. His cane clicked in his right hand. The camera rested inside his coat. Sunlight fell behind the water tower, and the ducks floated near the pond. The bench was occupied. Preston sat there with his legs stretched forward and a paper cup in one hand. His 4 friends were spread along the tree line with their phones partly raised. Grant stood near a low iron railing, exactly where Preston had told him to stand. Blake held another paper cup awkwardly. Colby waited near a picnic table with his phone ready. Wesley stood on the path, blocking the easiest exit. Everett approached slowly. He noticed every position without appearing to study any of them. He stopped several feet from the bench. "Get out of my park, old man. I'm only feeding the ducks, son. Don't call me son." Preston rose, grabbed Everett's collar, and jerked him upward. "Who do you think you are? Acting like you're my father, you limping old fool. Please let go of my shirt." Preston kicked the cane away. Everett's injured knee collapsed, and he struck the concrete. "You're making my park stink. Maybe I should ruin your other knee so you can crawl home." "Please don't say that." Preston turned toward his friends. "Teach him a lesson. The old man thinks he can talk back to me." They closed around him. Everett pushed himself upright while his knee burned and every joint protested. Then he looked at Preston. "Are you sure about that, son?" Preston threw a wide, fast punch toward Everett's jaw. Everett's left hand rose, as if it remembered everything his mind had tried to leave behind. Muscle carried its own memory, and this appointment had been waiting for decades. He caught Preston's wrist in the air, guided the punch past his shoulder, and turned on his good leg. Preston stumbled forward. Blake rushed from the right. His coffee cup slipped from his hand as he reached toward Everett's throat. Everett did not hit him. He captured Blake's wrist, lowered his weight, and used Blake's own momentum to pull him past. Blake's face struck the arm of the bench, and he dropped without a word. The cup rolled beneath the seat, its lid coming loose as coffee spread across the concrete. Everett's knee screamed. He ignored it. He had been ignoring that knee for most of his adult life. Wesley came from the front with both hands extended. Everett stepped aside, placed one hand beneath Wesley's elbow, and guided him firmly into the wet grass. He held him there only long enough to stop the struggle, then released him. "Stay down." Wesley stayed down. Colby charged from behind. Everett sensed him before seeing him. A person who had once survived for a living learned to feel movement in the air. Everett turned, and Colby rushed past him, striking the iron railing with his chest. Grant had been waiting for his cue. The punch he expected never came. Confused, he began his planned fall anyway, throwing himself toward the concrete as the second coffee cup flew through the air. Everett caught him by the collar before he landed. Then he lowered Grant carefully onto his back in the grass. "You dropped this." Everett placed the coffee cup upright beside him. His voice had not changed. He had not raised it. He had not thrown a single strike. Only Preston remained standing. Everett still held his wrist. He had never released it. Preston looked at his friends on the ground. He looked at the phone still recording. He noticed a jogger several yards away and the deli window across the street, where another camera captured the scene from a wider angle. Finally, he looked into Everett's eyes, still quiet as unmoving water. Everett released his wrist. "Go home, son." Preston ran. He truly ran, his boots sliding across the gravel and his jacket flapping behind him as he passed the picnic table and the swings. He did not wait for his friends. They rose in stages after he disappeared. Blake held his nose. Colby leaned against the railing. Grant stared at the sky. Wesley remained face down in the grass for several more moments. None of them knew where to follow Preston, or whether they should follow him at all. Everett sat on the bench and retrieved his cane. His lip was bleeding. His knee had begun to swell. His hands shook with the delayed tremor of a man whose body had been asked to remember something it had not done in many years. He wiped his mouth and looked toward the ducks gathered on the far side of the pond. "You can come back now." The jogger reached him before the ambulance did. Her name was Tessa Monroe. She was 29 and worked as a paralegal at a Columbus law firm. She had been recording from the moment Everett approached the bench. She sat beside him without turning off her phone. "Are you all right, sir?" "I've been worse. An ambulance is coming." "Thank you." "I recorded everything, every angle I could get, and the sound is clear." Vernon has another recording. So does the camera in the deli window. Tessa gave a short, surprised laugh. "Sir, this is going everywhere." She was right. Before the evening ended, the first clip had reached millions of viewers. The world quickly chose its favorite moment. Everett's calm face, followed by the words, "Go home, son," was replayed, slowed down, set to music, and printed on shirts. The phrase "not 1 inch more" began spreading online before sunrise. That was the good part. The bad part began with breakfast. By the next morning, several news outlets had adopted a very different version of the story. Their headlines claimed that a retired man had attacked a group of local youths in Briar Glen Park. They did not mention that Everett was black. They did not mention that he had repeatedly asked Preston to stop. They did not mention the collar grab, the kicked cane, or the weeks of harassment. A talk radio host called the encounter senseless. A local newspaper published an editorial asking where vigilante justice would end. By midday, a process server knocked on Everett's door. Vernon answered. "Everett Hayes? Not right now. I have a civil complaint." The server handed him a large envelope. Vernon closed the door and carried it to the kitchen. Everett sat at the table with an ice pack against his knee. He opened the envelope, read the first page, then read it again. Preston Caldwell and all 4 of his friends were suing him for aggravated assault. Blake claimed a broken nose. Colby claimed a concussion. Wesley claimed emotional distress. Grant claimed a burn from spilled coffee and a torn ligament. Preston said he had been the victim of an unprovoked attack by a former professional fighter who had lured him into a public confrontation. They demanded $12 million in damages. Everett placed the papers on the table and looked at Vernon. "That was fast. I told you they'd twist it. You didn't tell me they'd sue me for $12 million. I underestimated them." Outside, one car door slammed, then another. A news van stopped in front of the deli. The days that followed were the hardest Everett had endured since Marlene's funeral. A reporter stood on the sidewalk with Everett's apartment window behind her and told viewers that a retired Briar Glen man was at the center of a growing controversy. She said cell phone footage showed him confronting a group of young men in the park. Confronting, not defending. Everett heard the words from his kitchen. Vernon closed the window. Soon the story hardened into something that barely resembled the truth. Talk radio described a senior citizen attacking 5 youths. One television segment began with Blake's injured nose and ended before Preston grabbed Everett's collar. Online opinions split in half. One side called Everett a hero. The other called him a criminal. The louder side appeared to be winning. When Everett entered the corner cup, Marjorie did not have his coffee waiting. She stood behind the counter and looked first at him, then at the floor. "Everett, I can't." "Can't what?" "I'm getting calls. People are threatening to boycott. They are flooding the business with bad reviews." "You've known me for 15 years, Marjorie." "I know." She did not pour the coffee. Everett stood there for a moment, then left. The bell above the door did not ring. Marjorie had removed it. Later, Everett tried to walk toward the park. A woman he did not recognize stopped him on the sidewalk. "You should be in jail." He turned around and went home. That evening, someone threw an egg at his apartment window. It struck the glass only a few feet from Marlene's photograph. Vernon cleaned it away without speaking. Everett opened the notebook and wrote, "Egg thrown at window. No license plate visible." Mrs. Whitmore stopped waving from her porch. Her curtains remained closed. Raphael opened the bicycle shop but would not look up when Everett passed. The sidewalk that had greeted him every morning for decades became a path of turned backs and closed doors. Everett kept walking. He had spent much of his career entering rooms where people wanted him to fail. A hostile sidewalk would not stop him. Another editorial appeared in a major Ohio newspaper. A law professor called Everett's response disproportionate force by a trained combatant. The article did not mention Preston grabbing his collar. It did not mention the cane. It did not mention the steady escalation that came before the attack. The lawsuit gained momentum. Harlan Caldwell had hired a well-connected personal injury firm from Columbus. The The firm filed an emergency motion barring Everett from the park, the bench, and the surrounding blocks. A judge approved it. Everett was suddenly forbidden from entering the only place in Briar Glen that still felt like home. Vernon called Simone Carter, the civil rights attorney whose card he had given Everett. She answered immediately. "I've been watching the coverage," she said. "Then you know how bad the framing is. I know the lawsuit has no foundation. I know the injunction should not survive an appeal. But you need to win in public before you can win in court." How? Evidence. Every recording, every notebook entry, every witness, every detail, and especially the thing they don't know you have. What thing? The thing they never bothered to look for. The following week seemed longer than any week Everett could remember. He stayed inside while Vernon cooked scrambled eggs. They ate in silence. The telephone rang several times. Everett did not answer. Some calls came from reporters. Others came from people in town who had finally begun to wonder whether they had judged him too quickly. When Everett tried to walk to the grocery store, a pickup truck slowed beside him. The driver rolled down his window. "Are you the man from that video?" "Depends on which video." "The one where you attacked those boys." Everett kept walking. The truck matched his pace. "My nephew knows one of them. You broke his nose. Your nephew's friend grabbed my collar first." "That's not what the news said." "The news is wrong." The truck sped away. Everett returned home through the alley behind the bicycle shop so no one else could follow him. Simone later called with another development. The Caldwell law firm had sent a demand insisting that all body camera and audio recordings be destroyed as illegally obtained surveillance. "Can they make us do that?" Everett asked. "No, Ohio allows a participant in a conversation to record it. You were present. You gave your own consent." "Good. But they'll try to place the argument before a friendly judge. We need to move first. How far ahead do we need to be? Far enough to make the truth impossible to hide." That night, Everett could not sleep. He sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open and read every entry from the beginning. There were dozens of encounters recorded across 2 weeks. He had written each one in the same steady handwriting he once used for Marlene's grocery lists. He closed the notebook and looked at the refrigerator. "I'm tired, baby," he said. "But I'm not finished." Vernon found him asleep at the table the next morning, the notebook beneath his arm and a cold cup of coffee beside him. "Wake up, Everett. We have a meeting to win." Everett put on his coat. He checked the camera button. He clipped the audio pen inside the notebook. "Let's go." Before the public meeting, Simone came to Briar Glen and sat at Everett's kitchen table with Vernon and a legal pad. She watched the body camera recording. She watched the wide-angle recording from the deli. She watched Tessa's phone footage. Then she closed the laptop. "I need the notebook." Everett handed it to her. Dozens of entries filled the pages. Each included the sequence of events, witnesses, vehicles, weather conditions, and exact words Everett could remember. His handwriting remained steady from the first page to the last. Simone looked at Vernon. "Your friend is meticulous. He was a professional fighter. Fighters study everything." Simone turned back to Everett. "The town council is holding an open meeting. I want to present all of this during public comment." "That isn't a courtroom." "No. In this case, it may be better. It's a room filled with voters, neighbors, reporters, and people who have already formed opinions. If they refuse to listen, we'll take the same evidence to court. But I believe they'll listen." "Why?" Simone turned the laptop toward him. On the screen was a captured image from Wesley's phone. It showed a private group conversation with 5 names. The messages were dated, timed, and painfully clear. "Wesley's mother found these. She called me herself. She is furious." Everett read the first message, then the second. He leaned back in his chair. The conversation described everything: the plan to provoke him, the assigned camera positions, Grant's staged fall, the thrown coffee cup, the words Preston intended to use, even the order in which the friends were supposed to move. Preston had written it all in a group conversation called Operation Bench Press. "Operation Bench Press," Everett repeated. Vernon looked at Simone. "They wrote it down." "They always write it down," Simone said. "They always believe a private conversation will remain private." Everett closed the laptop and glanced at Marlene's photograph. "Then we show them." Outside, the news van remained parked near the deli. Inside, the evidence was organized and ready. The confession already existed in the young men's own words. They simply did not know it had been found. The town hall meeting filled every chair in the council chamber. More residents stood along the walls, and television crews positioned their cameras at the back. Tessa sat near the front with her phone already recording. Everett entered with Vernon on one side and Simone on the other. He wore the same coat. The body camera remained hidden behind the button. Preston sat in the front row beside his father. Harlan wore a dark suit. Preston wore a carefully pressed collared shirt. Their attorney, Adrian Beckett, sat nearby with a leather folder on his lap. The room changed when Everett walked in. It did not become silent. Instead, it filled with the low murmur of hundreds of people deciding what they believed. Council Chair. Evelyn Mercer called the session to order and announced that the council would hear from both parties regarding the incident in Briar Glen Park. Adrian Beckett stood first. He was polished and calm. He told the room that 5 young men had been attacked without provocation by someone with professional combat training. He played an edited video showing Blake holding his nose and Colby bent over the railing. He used the word ambush. He used the word predator. He claimed Everett had lured the young men into the park and launched a violent assault while pretending to act in self-defense. When he sat down, a small section of the room applauded. Simone rose. Council members, my name is Simone Carter, and I represent Everett Hayes. I have 3 pieces of evidence to show you. Together, they will take only a few minutes. She held up a small storage drive. A technician connected it to the projector. First, the body camera footage recorded from inside Mr. Hayes' coat. The room watched Everett approach the bench. They saw Preston waiting. They saw him rise. They saw him seize Everett's collar. They saw the cane kicked away and Everett's knee strike the concrete. They heard every word in the correct order, without music, edits, or commentary. The room was no longer quietly divided. People began whispering, gasping, and calling out. Second, Simone said, the audio from Mr. Hayes' recording pen. She played a brief section. Preston's voice was unmistakable as he encouraged his friends to teach the old man a lesson. A woman near the front covered her mouth. Third, Simone continued, the projector changed to a screenshot of the group conversation. 5 names appeared beneath the title, Operation Bench Press. These messages were recovered from one participant's phone by his mother. They contained dates and recorded times. They describe a deliberate plan to provoke Mr. Hayes into a physical confrontation. Simone read only 3 messages. The first instructed the group where to stand, who would grab Everett, who would fall, and who would film. The second said that if Everett refused to strike, they should escalate by kicking his cane and insulting him. The third stated that Harlan Caldwell's attorney would be ready to file a lawsuit immediately afterward. That was enough. The room erupted. People stood. Voices collided. Evelyn Mercer struck the gavel repeatedly until order returned. Simone waited, then spoke again. Mr. Hayes did not swing first. He did not ambush anyone. He is a 68-year-old widower who has fed ducks in that park for decades. He was selected, harassed, physically attacked, and then sued for defending himself with extraordinary restraint. She turned toward Preston. The question is not why Mr. Hayes protected himself. The question is why 5 young men planned, in writing, to destroy an elderly man's life. The answer is inside their own messages. Preston's face had lost all color. Harlan stared straight ahead. Adrian Beckett stood. These messages have not been authenticated, Simone answered before he could continue. They were submitted to the Briar Glen Police Department by the mother of one of the participants. She authenticated the device and the account herself. Investigators are reviewing them now. Adrian sat down. Evelyn Mercer looked at Preston, then Harlan, then the residents filling the chamber. I believe we have heard enough for this public session. I will recommend that the matter be referred to the county prosecutor for independent review. I will also request immediate reconsideration of the order, barring Mr. Hayes from the park. Applause rose from both sides of the room. Everett did not clap. He did not smile. He remained seated with both hands resting on his cane, his eyes lowered toward the floor. Vernon placed one hand on his shoulder. Tessa's recording of that moment, Everett sitting still while the room rose around him, was viewed millions of times. It became one of the most replayed moments in the entire story. But another moment would soon surpass it. After the meeting, a reporter stopped Simone in the hallway. Ms. Carter, Is your client truly a former professional fighter? Simone smiled. You should look him up. Someone did. A sports writer found Everett's record buried in old archives. He had competed for 12 years on the regional circuit, earning 31 victories against 6 losses, with 22 finishes by submission. He had appeared in one nationally televised main event against Curtis Vance in Toledo. The internet quickly uncovered the old footage. Everett appeared in red trunks with his hands raised. Marlene sat in the front row wearing the green dress from the photograph. The clip showed Everett ending the match with a controlled arm lock in the final round. Then someone found the interview recorded afterward. Everett, still breathing hard with ice against his hands, looked into the camera and said, I compete clean because my wife is watching. Marlene stood behind him in the green dress, arms crossed and smiling as though she already understood everything he might become. Millions of people watched that clip. Many wrote that Everett had fought with honor for Marlene then and had protected her memory now. The phrase "not 1 inch more" spread far beyond Ohio. A retired combat sports analyst studied the park footage frame by frame. He explained Everett's wrist redirection against Preston, the momentum shift against Blake, the elbow control used on Wesley, and the careful collar catch that prevented Grant from striking the concrete. 4 controlled takedowns in less than 2 minutes. No punches thrown. No unnecessary injury caused by Everett's hands. The analyst ended with one sentence. This man had the ability to seriously hurt all 5 of them. He chose restraint. That is true mastery. That analysis was watched by millions on its own. Back in Briar Glen, Everett sat at his kitchen table and looked at Marlene's photograph. He said nothing. He did not need to. In his heart, she already knew. The consequences arrived one after another. The county prosecutor announced a formal investigation into conspiracy, assault, filing a false report, and attempting to use a fraudulent civil claim. The lawsuit against Everett was withdrawn before the day ended. Adrian Beckett's firm soon dropped Preston as a client entirely. Blake cooperated first. His father drove him to the police station. Blake gave a complete statement. He confirmed the group conversation, the plan, and the roles Preston had assigned. He admitted that he had not wanted to participate. He also admitted that he had done it anyway. Colby cooperated next. No one drove him. He entered the station alone and asked to speak with the investigator handling the case. Wesley's mother had already made certain her son told the truth. She sat beside him through every interview and did not allow him to avoid a single question. Grant was last. He arrived with a public defender and confirmed that his fall had been staged. He admitted the coffee cup had been thrown on cue. He also revealed that Preston had rehearsed the scene with him several times in a parking lot behind a gas station. 4 statements, 4 signatures, 4 young men pointing toward the same person. Preston Caldwell was arrested at his father's home. The charging documents included conspiracy, filing a false report, assault, and interference with Everett's mobility aid. Under state law, the cane was treated as an extension of Everett's ability to move safely. Harlan Caldwell held a press conference outside the family restaurant. He said his son had made serious mistakes. He said the family would cooperate. He did not mention the redevelopment plan, the 3 properties, or the offers Everett had rejected. A reporter asked about them anyway. Mr. Caldwell, is it true your family repeatedly tried to purchase Mr. Hayes's property before this incident? Harlan ended the press conference. The Briar Glen Council froze the redevelopment application pending an ethics review. The Caldwell restaurant began losing reservations. The newspaper that had condemned Everett published a front-page correction describing what its first reports had missed. The law professor who had called Everett's response disproportionate issued a brief statement claiming his remarks had been presented without full context. He did not apologize. The news cycle turned as quickly as it had before. The same outlets that called Everett dangerous now called him heroic. A national morning program aired the complete body camera video under the title, "The Man Who Refused to Swing First." For the first time, a national audience saw the entire encounter without edits. Simone received calls from civil rights firms offering support. Documentary producers contacted her. A congressional staff member asked about discussing stronger protections against elder abuse. Everett received letters, real letters, written on paper and mailed in stamped envelopes. One came from a retired Marine in Virginia who had been attacked at a bus stop. Another came from a grandmother in Detroit whose landlord had tried to force her from her home. A former fighter in Mississippi wrote about being arrested after defending himself at a gas station. Each letter said the same thing in different words. I thought I was alone. Everett read every one. He answered none of them, but he kept them all in a shoebox beneath the bed beside Marlene's shoes. The reporter who wrote the most damaging local article was placed on leave. An internal review found that he had relied only on the Caldwell family's statement. He had never contacted Everett. He had never called Simone. He had not watched the complete footage, even though it had been publicly available before his article appeared. Marjorie called Everett soon afterward. Everett. Marjorie. I'm sorry. He remained quiet. Your coffee is on me for as long as you want it. I'll come by soon. I'll have it ready. Everett ended the call and remained at the kitchen table. Vernon was in the next room, speaking with someone at the gym about returning to Cleveland. Everett looked at Marlene's photograph. He did not cry. He had done much of his crying in locker rooms and empty parking lots where no one could see. Long ago, he had learned that grief could be private, while strength was often what a person showed the world after the tears were gone. We did it, baby, he whispered to the glass. When the order against him was lifted, Everett returned to Briar Glen Park for the first time in weeks. The bench remained between the oak trees. The ducks moved across the pond. The gray herons stood in the shallows as though nothing had changed. Someone had placed yellow flowers on the bench. There was no card. Everett sat down, opened his paper bag, and tore the bread into small pieces. He dropped them into the water one at a time. Mrs. Whitmore approached along the path and stopped beside him. Welcome back, Everett. Thank you, ma'am. Marlene would be proud. Everett nodded. He did not trust his voice enough to answer. The town council later approved a resolution dedicating the bench between the two oak trees. A small brass plaque would read, "In memory of Marlene Hayes. She loved this place." Everett's name did not appear on it. He had asked the council to leave it off. It was always her bench, he said. Months later, Vernon opened the second floor of his Cleveland gym to a new program called Elder Shield. The classes were free for adults over 60. They were not fighting classes. They taught people how to use a body camera, maintain a written record, preserve evidence, record an encounter without increasing tension, and protect themselves within the law, never 1 inch beyond what was necessary. Everett drove to Cleveland for the opening. He sat in a folding chair at the back of the room and watched Vernon show a group of older adults how to hide a camera safely inside a coat button. One participant was 81. She took careful notes in a spiral notebook, much like Everett's. Tessa became the program's legal liaison. She left her former firm and joined Simone Carter's practice. She suggested building a website, posted the curriculum, and answered the first call from a senior center asking to use the program. More calls followed from other Ohio cities, then from communities farther south. By the next spring, Elder Shield had chapters in 9 cities. Simone took Everett's civil countersuit to trial. The jury found Preston and the other 4 young men responsible for defamation, intentional emotional harm, and conspiracy to file a fraudulent claim. The damages were not $12 million. They did not need to be. The amount was enough for Everett to keep his apartment, repair the roof above the deli, and place the remainder into a community fund Marlene would have appreciated. Preston was sentenced separately in criminal court. He received community service, probation, and a restraining order covering the park, the deli, and every block between them. Harlan sold the restaurant not long afterward. The Caldwell sign came down quietly. Blake accepted a plea agreement and entered a mediation training program. His father drove him to every session. Colby moved away and left no forwarding address. Wesley completed community college. His mother made certain he did. Grant found work at a warehouse outside Columbus. During the summer, he sent Everett a 1-page letter. Everett read it at the kitchen table. He did not write back, but he kept the letter in the drawer beside the black notebook. The combat sports community eventually found Everett. Invitations arrived from podcasts, interview programs, and gyms. One training center offered him a paid position as a senior advisor. He declined nearly all of them. He accepted one video call with a high school class in Toledo. A 16-year-old student asked what it felt like to face 5 people at the age of 68. Everett thought carefully before answering. It felt like an ordinary afternoon. The student laughed. The teacher laughed. Everett did not. He meant it. The following fall, Briar Glen Park hosted its first annual stand-up day. Vernon came from Cleveland. Simone attended. Tessa brought her daughter. Marjorie provided the coffee. Mrs. Whitmore carried a sheet cake decorated with the words, "Marlene's Bench" in yellow icing. Everett sat beneath the oak trees. The brass plaque was new. He ran his thumb across the letters but did not read them aloud. The ducks came to him. They always came to him. This story is not only about a strong man who knew how to protect himself, it is also about the quieter strength required to remain disciplined when anger would be easier. Everett had every reason to strike back harder, yet he chose control. He gathered evidence. He accepted help. He trusted the truth, even when the truth seemed slower than the lie. Preston's choices also remind us that pain does not excuse cruelty. Feeling ignored, disappointed, or ashamed may explain why someone reaches for power, but it does not remove responsibility for the harm that follows. Every action leaves a mark, and sometimes the people who stand beside us must decide whether friendship means following a bad choice or having the courage to stop it. The people of Briar Glen learned something as well. A headline can be loud and still be wrong. A familiar face can turn away when fear takes over. An apology cannot erase what happened, but it can become the first step toward doing better. Real justice is not revenge. It is truth brought into the light, responsibility accepted, harm repaired where possible, and dignity returned to the person who has denied it. Most of all, Everett's story reminds us to notice the quiet people around us, the older neighbor walking alone, the widower sitting on a bench, the person whose calmness may hide a lifetime of courage, loss, love, and hard-earned wisdom. Kindness costs very little, but choosing it at the right moment can prevent consequences that last for years. Forgiveness does not require forgetting, and second chances do not remove accountability. They simply allow people who truly change to build something better from what they have done. Living with honor means knowing what we are capable of, choosing restraint when we can, standing firm when we must, and never using our strength to make someone else feel small. If this story reminded you of a grandfather, a neighbor, or a quiet person who deserves to be seen, share it with them. Subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling us who your Everett is. Almost everyone knows someone like him, and many of them are still sitting quietly on a bench, waiting for the world to notice.